The Commission statement, State of Play of the External Aspects of the European Migration Agenda towards a new Migration Compact. And of course, we start with the Commission. So, Mr. Timmermans, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Federica Mogherini and I are very happy to be with you here today. As you know, in the last couple of months, we have been working very closely with your Parliament on the issue of the smugglers working between Turkey and Greece, the terrible loss of life in the Aegean Sea, and because of what we have done, the business model of the smugglers on that route has been broken. People are no longer dying in the Aegean, and the numbers coming across from Turkey are very low indeed. But look at the southern Mediterranean. People are dying, drowning in the sea. Smugglers have found a new business model, so our work is far from over. We must do the same we have done on the route through the Aegean, also in the southern Mediterranean, to find solutions, sustainable solutions. We cannot tolerate this, the loss of human life at this scale, and we must do everything we can to stop it. That means we must engage more effectively with third countries of origin and transit to address the migration challenge in the long term, but also right now, immediately. And by we, I mean both the EU and the Member States. Learning from last year's most important lessons, including the Valletta Summit, today we propose a new partnership framework for across-the-board cooperation on migration with third countries. And we're asking you, European Parliament, European Council, Member States and the European Investment Bank to give it their full backing. This framework rethinks how all actors, Member States, EU institutions and third countries work together to bring order to migration flows and strive for well-managed migration. It establishes a result-oriented approach to mobilise and focus all EU and Member States' tools and resources for that purpose. We propose to use a mix of positive and negative incentives to reward those third countries willing to cooperate effectively with us and to ensure that there are consequences for those who do not. This includes using our development and trade policies to create leverage. Member States will need to play their part and be ready to mirror this approach through their actions and resources. We will set up a coordination mechanism to make sure we fully tap the EU's collective influence. Together, we can achieve much more. Operationally, our short-term objective is to save lives in the Mediterranean, increase returns of those who do not have the right to stay, and enable migrants and refugees to stay closer to home rather than embark on dangerous journeys. As we stem irregular migration flows, we must open up legal ways to Europe for those in need, in particular with more resettlement for refugees. We will develop compacts tailored to each partner country's specific circumstances, whether country of origin or transit, or hosting a large refugee population. This approach will help bring tangible benefits for the refugees, for third countries, and obviously for the European Union and our own citizens. We propose to first launch compacts with a limited number of priority countries: Jordan, Lebanon, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, Mali, and Ethiopia. We will also increase our engagement with Tunisia and Libya. To start with, the focus will be on improving border and migration management on the ground. This will require appropriate financing. The Africa Trust Fund will immediately be strengthened with €500 million from the reserve of the European Development Fund. We are calling Member States to match this to reach €1 billion. This could be done now, not waiting for the next boat to capsize. But this is not only about additional funds. This is as much, maybe even more, about better mobilising the funds we, the EU and Member States, have at our disposal. Combining our forces, a total of €8 billion can be made available to support the compacts for the next 5 years. Looking at longer-term challenges, we also need to do more to improve opportunities in countries of origin, so people are not compelled to leave. For that, we need to reconsider our traditional models of development cooperation and give a much greater role to private investors. While bottlenecks to investment differ across regions, we think we can replicate outside Europe the success, if not the exact design, of our internal European Fund for Strategic Investments. So we will shortly propose a new external investment fund aiming to crowd in private investment in developing countries, starting with Africa and the EU's neighbourhood. For this, we will mobilise €3.1 billion, which should trigger total investment of up to €31 billion. And we could even reach €62 billion if Member States and other partners match the EU's contribution. I am convinced that by doing this, we can reach concrete results together with our partners. For this, we need the full commitment of all EU institutions, Member States and partner countries. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Prime Vice President. Now, High Representative Mogherini, you have the floor.
Grazie Presidente. Mi permetta di...
Thank you very much, President. Let me just take a moment to join the moment of pain that this House expressed yesterday for the loss of Gianluca Buonanno. We've always held opposing positions. We've held lively debates in this House and also in the Italian Parliament. I mean, certainly today we would have had opposing positions, but first and foremost, we are human beings, and I'd like to express my sincere condolences to his family, first and foremost his wife and children, his loved ones, and to his political group here and in Italy.
English, and turning to the issue we are debating today, we are presenting today. Together with France, together with the rest of our colleagues in the Commission, we have, I think, today a couple of very strong messages on one side, political messages, and also a couple of very strong facts, commitments, concrete commitments we're presenting today, and on which we hope we will get the full support of the Parliament and also of the Council and the rest of the institutions. The first message is in the method. We are sitting here together. Last month we were also sitting here together on another issue. I think it was on the SDGs. This is the way in which this Commission has chosen to work, joining the different strands of our policies and works and tools, external, internal, and trying to give a strategic vision to our actions. And I would like to thank not only France but also our services for an excellent teamwork we have developed in these years. Second strong message is a shift in paradigm and attitude. We need to move from the narrative we've had so far, that the refugee and migration crisis is a European crisis, to the recognition that this is not only an issue for Europe. The majority of the movements of people in the world are happening inside Africa, inside Asia, not only towards Europe, and that it is a global phenomenon that we need to face with a global approach. I was yesterday in New York addressing the UN Security Council, meeting the Secretary General, working with them in the preparation of the summit on migration that we will hold, the UN will hold at the margins of the General Assembly in September. This is the right approach that we are trying to encourage. It's a global responsibility. Every single partner, every single country, every single region in the world, every single regional organisation, international institution has to do its part. Europe is trying to do its part, saving lives at sea. With our Operation Sophia, we saved already tens of thousands of lives. All others have to do the same, also because it is not only the people that are dying at sea that we have to save. It's also the thousands of people dying in the desert before they reach the shores of the Mediterranean that are not on our TV screens, but are also human lives. And this is a shift in mentality, a shift in approach that would bring us to build partnerships Global partnerships is what we need to face a global phenomenon like this. Third strong message is that we need to focus in our partnership approach, first of all with the countries of our immediate region around the Mediterranean. Compacts with Jordan and Lebanon were already decided in February, and in this package we have a strong message of implementation of them. But the other message we have is a strong focus on Africa. Africa, for demographic reasons, for economic reasons, for inequalities, for climate change reasons, is going to continue to be a major continent when it comes to movement of people. And this is not going to disappear anytime soon, unless we take a strategic approach, long term, together with immediate term, to face the inequalities and the policy issues that are at the core of the reason why people are leaving their own countries. And with this communication, we put our relation with Africa in terms of strategic partnership strongly, and also with some resources on it. So coming to the facts, coming to the commitments, Frans already mentioned the numbers of the economic commitments we put in it. First, the increased contribution to the Trust Fund for Africa, the extra €500 million, bringing it to €2.3 billion on the EU funds for migration-related actions in Africa. And let me here raise a plea to the Member States to match this commitment, because we will need to be consistent also on that side. Second, concrete commitment, the renewed partnerships under the migration compacts, tailored to the priority countries we've identified. Jordan and Lebanon, as I said, we already developed compacts during the London conference earlier this year, so now it's about delivering on this. We've identified Nigeria, Niger, Senegal, Mali and Ethiopia as further priority countries. With all of them, in the last 7-8 months, I have launched already processes to debate with them, to discuss with them, governments, presidents, but also civil society and local authorities, on what is needed in these countries, sometimes in specific areas of the countries, sometimes in specific villages or regions in the country, where the majority of the flows come from because of difficult economic or climate or social or sometimes human rights situations. So that our actions are targeted where it's needed and that we manage to have a win-win approach, and moving from the delivery of aid to the investment for Africa, and especially for starting with these countries. The win-win approach is what we need, because if this is a global phenomenon we need to manage together. This means that these countries that are at the same time countries of origin, of transit and of destination, each of them, also need our support to manage better their internal challenges when it comes to hosting refugees and migrants, which means also support to the local authorities, infrastructures and possibility to sustain the effort from all different points of view. Third, the long-term approach. Frans mentioned it. We launched an external investment plan, which is indeed, in my view, a Copernican revolution in our approach to development cooperation. We discussed this with the development ministers and with the foreign ministers in the last two Foreign Affairs Councils. Investing in Africa, mainly. Trying to mix, in a smart way, European funds, public funds, private investors. We don't have to be scared of bringing the private sector in, and international financial institutions, starting from the EIB, as guarantors. Following the good example of the European Fund for Strategic Investments, learning the lessons that can be learned there, and developing a long-term investment plan for our partners that need infrastructure, social improvements, creation of jobs, supporting growth in these countries. This, I believe, is finally an approach that is at the same time immediate and strategic. So I really believe that this can complement in a coherent way the proposals that we had adopted last year with the agenda on migration, that had already one external part of measures. This builds on that on the excellent achievement we had in the Valletta summit, building on partnership with our African friends and developing in a coherent way the work we have done in the last year, broadening and deepening our work both in the immediate and in the short term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. Now we start a debate with political groups. First speaker, Mr. Weber.
Dear colleagues, President, honourable members, Vice Presidents, migration is the mega topic of our time, and I'm sure we'll be having lots of debates about it. The principle here for my group is a clear, we have yes to helping, yes to partnership. When it comes to dying in our neighbourhoods, we've got to stop that. On the other hand, it's also clear that we have to protect Europe from new migratory flows. The Europeans are fearful about this, so there are two sides of the coin that we have to deal with. First of all, it's important to do what both Commission representatives have made clear. That is, first of all, we have to make it clear to our citizens that if Europe is united, if we have good Commission proposals, then we can deliver. This long period of exception in the Balkans has been ended. Now in the Aegean we now have law and order restored, and the smuggling bans are being prevented. And the most important thing is that the dying has been lessened. The fewer people are drowning in the Aegean. So when we have united action, we deliver. We also need to be strong on the spot. The first 100 million have now been invested in Turkey. This is new money, and that's helping on the spot, and that works. And we all know that this is just the beginning of a long-term development in order to get a control of migratory issues, and so we have to work on legislation. I'd also thank expressly on behalf of for the work that's been done on the European Coast Guard. I'm very glad that there's been good cross-border, cross-group cooperation on Libe on the Coast Guard. It shows that we want to deliver when it comes to making safe third countries. And it's disappointing, I have to add, that with the present figures for the African Trust Fund, the member states are failing. We've got 1.8 million from the EU budget, and then 81 million only contributed from the member states so far. And the Council, which isn't present, I think needs to make that clear to the other member states. The promises made in Valletta have now to be kept. And so, colleagues, that's the first step. And the second step is now the question as to how we deal strategically with our neighbours and with Africa, and it must be clear to all of us that the destiny of our continent, the destiny of and the fate of Europe is very closely tied up with developments on the African continent. So I thank you therefore for these proposals that have come from the Commission today, Federica Mogherini, Frans Timmermans. I'd also like to mention Commissioner Hahn as well, who has been working on this. So thank you. These are good proposals. They give us a basis for the work we have to do, and it makes us aware that by 2050 population numbers in Africa might be doubled, and that is therefore one of the mega topics of our time that Europe has to find an answer to. And we have to describe the truth, and one of the truths is that we have to look at this problem. We have to take it seriously, and not just for reasons of pity towards Africa, but out of our own interests. We have to turn to this continent and pay attention. We have to invest more money and give up more of our wealth. We have to use our monies better. The money that's already made available is included in that. We also have to go down new paths. So I'd like to say on behalf of the EPP that the idea of having an FC for Africa, to create a new FC for Africa and to use the leverage idea, and you can get our cooperative support for that idea, and we are open towards it. And the trade policy was also touched upon. That's an important tool of the European Union. We can build that partnership through trade policy, and a lot less from the European perspective, but also looking much more at the African perspective. But also, let's speak a clear language, because if a partner in Africa isn't cooperating when it comes to the return of illegal migrants who've been turned away, asylum applicants who failed, then if they don't cooperate, then there will be trade policy consequences. We can't have business as usual with partners that fail in their commitments. So we have to speak clearly with our African partner countries. So, dear colleagues, I'd just like to bring some more ideas into the debate, because today we're also talking about the blue card and legal channels towards Europe. My group is ready to get involved in a constructive way. When it comes to the blue card, we need further developments, but I would like to ask you to reflect reflects straight away that in the European Union we still have millions of people who have no jobs. We have millions of young people in the southern part of the continent without jobs. Therefore, on behalf of my group, I would like to make it clear that the blue card can't mean that we now open up new channels, that we have more labour migrants coming into Europe. I think, first of all, we should ensure that European young people have a future before we think about giving jobs to Africans on this continent. So thank you very much for these new ideas today. Europe can do this together. Europe united can cope with these problems. Thank you.
Mr. Weber, before going to the next speaker, I will not take blue cards at this stage after the first round of speeches. Now, Mr. Pittella, you have the floor.
Grazie.
Thank you. Vice President, colleagues, let's tell the truth here. We've been pretty myopic over recent years. We couldn't see that there was a young continent facing us that had many problems, had a great deal of potential, and above all, we didn't see that we could have shared the challenges that that continent faced. I mean, think about it. All the major challenges that we're facing are challenges that Africa's also facing. The fight against terrorism. I mean, can we do that without Africa? Managing migration flows, can we do that without Africa? Inter-religious dialogue, development, economic, civil, cultural development. Africa is a partner of ours, and now things are changing. And things are changing, let's tell the truth here, thanks to the Italian government and thanks to the European Commission. I'd like to say thank you to all of you. I'd like to say thank you to you, Mrs. Mogherini, Mr. Timmermans as well, to the entire Commission. And there are two important points here. Firstly, financial resources. You have done your best. 500 million from the reserve fund. I mean, that's the most the Commission could have done, realistically. Now it's up to member states. We can't make beautiful speeches and then not put your money where your mouth is. The member states have got to do that too. And then you've got the leverage effect. And here we'll have to look very carefully at what's done. I mean, the EIB needs to be involved. It needs to be involved in governance, but it needs to change its mission. It can't simply be funding AAA projects, because basically there are no AAA projects in Africa, I don't think, so nothing will be done in Africa, and we'll basically be wasting our time. Let's be honest here. Projects in Africa are risky. They're not AAA projects. The second point is political and cultural in nature. The compacts aren't only security related. Yes, okay, the idea is to manage migratory flows, and let's be careful in the way we say this. I mean, young Africans coming to take jobs from young Europeans. I mean, that's simply not true. It's an argument that doesn't hold water. I mean, if you look at these issues carefully, then you'll see that clearly. This programme, these compacts will help our security, yes, but above all, the idea is to come up with a civil, political, cultural, economic partnership with African countries. I mean, if it's basically just a deal to try and prevent migratory flows, then it's not going to achieve a great deal. I believe, however, that this should be a tool to draw up a grand alliance with African countries, and I think that really is what means that it does merit the name a real revolutionary change. Thank you.
Speaker is Madam Stevens.
Thank you very much, President, colleagues. The Commission today now has a master plan. We're going to be giving financial support to transit countries in Africa. We need, through that, to work against people smugglers, but also illegal migrants to Europe will have to be sent back. We would ask for countries around the Mediterranean to be brought together. We would say that, well, we hear a proposal now from the EU that migrants are going to be sent back to Tunisia, Egypt, Mali, etc., and at the same time efforts will be made to resettle real refugees. So this is what we are using as a mantra. The EU border control and looking at the active contributions here, well, they could carry out these operations. We need to make sure there's a complete approach to this.
Thank you. Mr. VERHOFSTADT.
Thank you very much, colleagues. First of all, let me say to the Commission that I'm very pleased with the global approach that you have finalized this morning, next to the European Border and Coast Guard, the new asylum system. Let's hope that we achieve a result by the end of the year. And now the new proposals on economic migration. I have to tell you, it's also a little bit a personal matter, because my first European Council, dear colleagues, was in 1999 in the north of Finland, in Tampere, where we decided from now on there's going to be a European asylum and migration policy. It was decided in principle in 1999. And so we are 17 years later, and I should say finally we are maybe nearby. So I'm positive about the global approach, but I'm more critical about the idea to make now migration compacts with third countries. If it is, dear colleagues from the Commission, to simply duplicate the deal with Turkey, then I have a number of key problems with it, because, let's be honest, I have here the report of Amnesty International of 1 week ago about this Turkey deal. Yeah, for Europe it's a way forward. There are less people that are coming to Europe in any way in that part of the Mediterranean, because in the meanwhile there is an increase of people flowing to Europe in other parts of the Mediterranean, and one has to do with the other, I think. But above that, and independent from that, what the report is saying is that for the refugees there is certainly not the solution for their problems. They live in awful conditions. There are more than 100,000 of these migrants who are stuck between IS and a wall that Turkey is building up, kilometre after kilometre, in the border with Syria. There is at the same time not a possibility for these people to have asylum, because Turkey has not ratified all the protocols of the Convention of Geneva, and for Syrian refugees it is not possible to have asylum. So the conclusion is that for refugees this deal is tragic, is a drama, is a problem. So to say today, oh, we have the solution for our problems, we're going to simply duplicate the deal with Turkey and we're going to roll it out to all the other countries, sorry, that is not the way forward, I think, in the future. It's simply saying, okay, we give you money and you keep the refugees. Well, that cannot be the deal. That cannot be a compact. So my proposal is, instead of having this migration compact, we need real partnership with these countries. And a real partnership with these countries, for me, that are three key elements. That is that together, not them, we together, Europeans, are opening reception centres in these countries to pick up these migrants and these refugees in these reception centres in Libya, in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in the North African countries, and where we can then secondly manage that together and make the difference who is a real refugee, who can then be resettled inside the European Union, and that is one thing, one possibility, who is a migrant, and we need to establish projects in the transit countries or in the countries of origin to give them a life, an expectation, and future in these countries of origin. And there the situation is better than ever, because let's not forget, Africa has today a growth between 4 and 5%. There is a basis for good projects in these transit countries and countries of origin. That seems to me the way forward. Not to say, oh, we give you money, we promised you money already 2 decades, we never gave it to you, now you can have it if you keep the refugees. That is for me not the compact. If that is the compact, I'm against it. If by, I hope so, and it's not by accident, that we can make real partnerships with them, managing together the borders, making projects in the transit countries, and so on, then it's a way forward. So you have to adapt the proposal in that way. And then finally, on the last element, that is the question of the blue card, I have to tell you one thing. The blue card, that doesn't exist in fact. There are 10,000 blue cards for the moment. It's a good attempt. I don't think that the directive is the right way forward, Mr. Timmermans. I think there is a better way forward, that is to make one blue card. Like there is one green card in the US, one blue card, instead of a directive which shall lead to 28 blue cards now in the European Union. And I think that we as European Parliament have the task with you to push the Council to accept one system instead of the 28 systems that could be the result of this directive.
Thank you. Next speaker, Madam Spinelli.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. The migration compact has been mentioning the rights on 6 occasions, but your entire proposal then contradicts these rights and mixes them up. It talks about returns. Basically, it's badly disguised return agreement. You're saying that the agreement with Turkey has saved lives, but basically the deaths have just moved elsewhere. There are thousands in May drowned in the Mediterranean. You say that we need to help the fugitives in their own countries, and you announce aid to 16 African countries, but there are conditions. All economic cooperation will be linked to returns and border controls. And the aid you're promising is a dictate. Either you keep these refugees in your internment camps, or you'll get no aid. And those who see wars in their countries shouldn't leave their countries. So the Syrians and the Iraqis and the Afghans shouldn't flee the war. And those who are suffering from dictatorships in Eritrea should not leave either. So you're saying that the fugitives, the refugees, have to become more resilient. They have to be self-sufficient. They should stay in their countries of origin or in countries of transit. So I'm asking myself whether you know what you're talking about when you brazenly are talking about the psychological background to resilience. Now, some people are actually, I've accused the Italian governments here as well. People think that they've got a clear conscience and white hands, unlike Lady Macbeth, until she saw they were covered in blood. So you are breaching international law in a systematic fashion, and you are reaching a shameful agreement with Turkey. What you are doing already, Mr. Timmermans and Mrs. Mogherini, what you're doing already is wrong, and you are actually stepping into line with the most extreme right wing in providing the policy answers you have come up with.
No, I'm sorry. Madam Sargentini. I apologize.
Thank you, Chair. Voorzitter, geachte heer Timmermans.
President, Mr. Timmermans, we're talking about the EU-Turkey deal again, and now we're talking about a new deal, a deal with countries in Africa, a new deal where the European Commission and Member States are trying to prevent dead people on the street and to direct migration. We're just repeating the mistakes we made with Turkey. We're saying now, African countries, we see your problems, how can we help? Well, what we're saying is, as Europe, we have populists who are quite vociferous, and therefore we have to stop migration. So we're not actually helping refugees. Look at the figures. I'm wondering if your proposals are actually going to get your targets. The same time period this year, more people have died than last year. How can this be? And why would the EU proposals change anything here? These now are not. These are people still dying. So we have to see how we can extend this helping hand. One important point is that you've made is that poverty is the reason many people come to Europe. And you've also started a discussion on the whole of migration through this. At the same time, though, you are breaking with the fundamentals of development. The aim behind that is to deal with poverty, and that's in the Treaty of Lisbon. But to our amazement, the Commission now wants to use that money to help to keep people there and to close the border. And Mr. Timmermans, if I may, and I'm just paraphrasing, if you close the borders, nobody's going to have anything to eat. Look at the ministers of development in Europe, the members of the Development Assistance Committee in the OECD. You are basically putting up borders. 2 quotes, Vice President, from yourself. The MDG showed that lack of development of some countries is a threat to all, but so is unsustainable development on a global scale. This is the challenge that today we commit to overcome together. Your words when you introduced the SDG project. You also said that in countries like ours there is no excuse for meeting the 0.7 GDP% for development aid. That's true, President, but you're forgetting that now, and you're using this money to strengthen Fortress Europe instead of dealing with inequality in the world. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Apparently there is a problem with translation in German, but only in German, so we are trying to fix that. It's coming now, apparently. Next speaker is Mr. Paksas.
Madam Vice President, colleagues, as we know, loyalty cannot be bought. Even if we manage to buy something or somebody, this is a short-term effect. Does the Commission propose to buy the East African countries, paying a couple of billion to stop the migration flow? The 6 billion which were used before that to buy Turkey, this is a holy naivety, because the money will be spent, but the problem will persist. O tempore o mores, Cicero would say. Perhaps we should start paying the peace tax to the terrorists to buy peace in Brussels, London, Paris, and other capitals. Will we be able, in a half a year, discussing this proposal calmly? I will repeat what I say at the start of the migrant crisis. The main condition of our agreements with African countries has to be safe borders in the region. All the support projects given to these countries have to be related to ensuring peace and stability in these countries. Another condition, which is basic, is strict and professional control of southern European borders. And we have to give up on the quota policy, because this will be an incentive to migration, because such a signal is sent that people are expected here, that we will take care of them. This is obvious. Don't think that the migrants and the smugglers don't understand this. When a fire is really big, we have to fell the forests, we have to put barriers, and but nobody tries to persuade the shopkeepers to stop selling matches.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. VILIMSKY.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Ladies and gentlemen, if you listen to the presentations of the people from the Commission and the Commissioners, and when you hear the main groups, you get the impression that these migratory waves are actually something we want. They're not a phenomenon at all. I mean, at the moment, the entire Arabian Peninsula is in chaos, as it has been in Egypt since the fall of Mubarak, as it has been in Tunisia, as it was in Libya, and when we were in Syria, when we tried to fight against Assad. I mean, people were applauding the Arab Spring at the time, thinking that a better world was about to be born. But now the huge problems started, and then the big migratory flows started towards Europe. And who were the first people to applaud this, apart from the political left? The people who applauded this were the bosses in the German car industry, Mercedes, Audi and BMW. They were happy that now armies of cheap labour were coming into their country, possibly, and that meant that the profits of the big business were going to be even greater. So please, you should have a clean conscience. You need to remember what sort of political aims you're pursuing here. As Austria is concerned, I can say that we've always had an open heart towards people who require protection and help. In 1956, after Hungary, in 1968, after Czechoslovakia, and then in 1998, after the Bosnian War. But now, when you've got these intercontinental migratory waves coming towards Austria, where people have travelled through 4 or 5 safe third countries but weren't safe enough for them because they wanted to come to Central Europe, then you have to say no at the stop, that's enough. And it was enough. And so and now, of course, the idea is that first of all you create a state of emergency in the region, then create safe areas in the region. But here I think that you've got other strategies up your sleeves, but the idea is to bring more and more people into Europe. But don't forget that the European ship might sink if you bring more and more people in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Zarianopoulos.
Όποιος δεν επισκέφθηκε hot spot, κέντρα κράτησης προσφύγων στα ελληνικά.
Well, have any of you been to hotspots on the Greek islands or any of the other camps on the Greek islands? I mean, anyone who has been there really will know what's going on. I mean, we all know what goes on after wars. I mean, for example, these are people who are being imprisoned just because the European Union sees them as migrants. I mean, what do you think people go through if they're sleeping in tents in muddy fields in the rain? What must it feel like to be hungry and to have to throw away food that not even dogs would eat? I mean, there are organisations that are being funded to the tune of millions who are supposed to be helping, and they're not doing anything. I mean, refugees are saying, you know, we don't even have the right to a life. We're just breathing. We have no future. The Turkey agreement put an end to migratory flows from Turkey, but has opened up the route to Italy, and you've got thousands of people who are dying along that route. Together with governments, you've given Turkey the role of playing the wolf among the sheep. I mean, there really aren't many people fighting against this situation and calling for appropriate conditions for these people for the time that they're in Greece.
Sola, 1 minute and a half.
Thank you, Madam President. I welcome very much this debate. As politicians, we need to move away from only firefighting and start to tackle the causes of migration. Otherwise, we risk our actions always being a little bit too little, too late. Our focus must be on preventing these situations from occurring in the first place. Migration is a global phenomenon, but one that requires measured, compassionate and effective European leadership. Europe needs thinking that goes beyond tomorrow's headline and focuses on tomorrow's generation. And this means that the Commission and, crucially, as we have heard, Member States must put up the money to help build capacity in third countries. We need to pump investment into developing countries, a form of Marshall Plan that will give people a chance at a future there without fear. Of course, we need better readmission and return tools for those not eligible for protection. Safe third countries must do more to accept their nationals back. This must be part and parcel of our negotiations. And then we can work to build capacity in their law enforcement, judicial and, crucially, asylum systems so that people in need of protection can also find safe haven in states outside of the European Union. Thank you very much.
2 minutes.
President, colleagues, Gianni PITTELLA said this. Of course we welcome this initiative. This morning, in the German media, we heard that we need to put pressure on African countries. That's not what this is about, I don't think, first and foremost. I think what this is about is having a common partnership, looking at the reasons for why people are fleeing. We need to invest in countries' environment, in jobs, so that people no longer need to flee. We need to work against human traffickers by cooperating with coast guards. We need to look at legal migratory possibilities. And also, we need to create a situation in these partner countries that will allow returns. Obviously, this is the time to do this, but this goes beyond just short-term crisis management and looks at a long-term management plan. We need to do that and do things we haven't been doing for decades. So it won't be easy, and we have two concerns, I think, in these discussions. First of all, the money. Mr. Weber, you mentioned this. 1.8 billion euros, 100 million top-up. I just don't think that member states will actually want to do much here, and I'm not optimistic that I can believe your figures. So things can only move if member states work very quickly, immediately pay into this top-up fund, and that will ensure the money we put in. Second concern, who are we actually cooperating with in specific countries? Investment to push forward democracy and peace, we need to do that, but we need to be pragmatic and realistic. So we can't just use the one-size-fits-all model, treat everybody the same. We need to have specific individual treaties, negotiate them, that also stick to our European rights. Thank you.
From Mr. Etheridge. Do you take a blue card from Mr. Etheridge?
From whom?
Mr. Etheridge.
No.
Okay. Mr. Etheridge, I'm sorry. So, next speaker is Mr. Van Orden. 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Well, I think we need a fundamentally different approach with absolute priority on the reducing the number of migrants entering the EU from outside. The current human rights-driven agenda merely encourages migration. The pull factors of an open door, the near certainty of remaining once arrived on European soil, poor enforcement and repatriation, excessively generous welfare payments, and a legal straitjacket of international human rights conventions are of far greater significance than the lack of physical barriers to migration. And Mr. Verhofstadt's ticket offices are not the answer, by the way. I'm also concerned about the effects of visa liberalisation. There are indications that many people from third countries enter the Schengen area legally and then overstay. These people are not effectively recorded and their departure is not enforced. What is the Commission going to do about this? And by the way, Madam President, there should be no additional call on the EU budget or for contributions from Member States to the EU budget. It's really what I mean to say. For migration policies, funds must be found from elsewhere within the budget. There must be former priorities which can be dropped, and now there are new priorities. That's where you find the money from. There is no excuse for trying to call for more money from Member States. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Madame WIKSTRÖM. 1 minute.
Thank you. There is no doubt that we must cooperate better with third countries in our neighbourhood in order to manage root causes of migration, to ensure safe and legal routes to Europe, and also dignified returns policy for those that are not entitled to international protection. I agree with the Commission on this. But we must get our act together and manage the migration flows. Just deporting everybody to so-called third countries is a dead end. It's a no-go, and Commission must realise that the EU-Turkey statement or deal or whatever status it has is a dead end. It's a no-go created to circumvent the democratic scrutiny of this House. Let's instead now focus on the creation of a dignified European asylum system, assisting our neighbourhood, but never, never outsource European responsibility to third countries. Otherwise, this continent, this union, will be held hostage indefinitely. Thank you very much.
Madame Vergiat, 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. Mrs. Mogherini, you pronounced a fine speech, but it doesn't reflect the reality of your policies. And Mr. Timmermans, I think, is a little bit more frank. The world is faced with a humanitarian crisis. That's the reality of this humanitarian crisis, according to the UNHCR. 28 million newly displaced people in 2015 fleeing natural disasters and conflicts, and 1.5 million arrived in Europe. And our charity is almost zero in the richest areas in the world. Of 160,000 people who are supposed to be relocated, only 1,500 have been relocated, and now we've given in to the blackmail from Turkey, and now we want to modernise our policy with Africa. All our policies should be mobilised in order to deal with this challenge. And Africa is going through a terrible humanitarian crisis already. 25% of refugees in the world are in Africa, and 27%. We're not going to stop. We're not going to stop migratory flows. There's going to be more migratory flows. There'll be 4,000 have drowned already, and another 7,000 will probably die before the end of the year. So how can you dare say that you've broken the business model of this smugglers? No, they're just adapting. I don't see the beginning of a revolution. I see cynicism, even when you talk about taking money from the EDF to help countries like Eritrea and Sudan. And I say, you know, we'll see the damage that does tomorrow.
2 minutes.
Thank you. Now, some colleagues have mentioned partnership and addressing poverty, human rights violations, and that sounds very nice. The problem is just it's not in the paper. What the Commission is actually proposing here, colleagues, is to use all foreign policy instruments that the EU has at its disposal, to use it for one sole purpose, namely to stop refugees and migrants on their way to Europe. Development aid, trade policies. We don't even have sanctions to sanction human rights violations in trade agreements, but now we will use trade sanctions when a country is not taking back the refugees, the people that fled from that specific country. The Commission even wants to give money to a country like Eritrea, where people are fleeing for good reasons, because of torture, because of forced labour, because of human rights violations. And the money is not going to Eritrea on the condition that those human rights violations would be stopped. No, the condition is to stop people from fleeing from these conditions. I really wonder what, after all of this, is left from our value-driven foreign policy of the European Union. And you have mentioned the global responsibility, and indeed that's very important, but where is the responsibility of the European Union itself, of our member states? We cannot go around telling everyone, all the transit countries, to house more refugees if we ourselves, as one of the richest continents of the world, are not doing our job. How can we tell Jordan, Turkey, other countries to house more refugees if we're ourselves not able to house a bare million? Money, even if well spent, is not enough. And on resettlement, how are you, Commissioners, going to force Member States to accept a sizable amount of refugees, sizable meaning at least hundreds of thousands each year, and not the 20,000 that were promised a year ago, of which only 4,000 have actually been resettled? Where is that responsibility? I think the problem we need to address is inside the European Union. It does not help to externalise the problems and look for a solution elsewhere. We have to find the solution inside the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Ferrara, 1 minute.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Well, the proposal from the Commission is basically a redrawing of Renzi's migration compact. I mean, the idea is to have ambiguous, not not disinterested cooperation. It's based on our needs rather than the rights of those who are migrating or who are refugees. I mean, we have these agreements and we say we're basing them on EU values, but basically the idea is to achieve management of migratory flows by basically paying billions and billions of euros. The speaker's interrupted.
Or else the translation cannot keep the pace with you. Slower, please. Go on.
Poco si dice.
This deal says very little on the natures of oppressive governments and dictatorships who would receive our assistance. There's not a lot said about the levels of corruption present in those countries, and there's not a lot said about the instability of governments such as Libya. It's very difficult to imagine cooperation with Libya. So in general terms, we are in favour with development cooperation and saving human lives, but we want to do this without hypocrisy. For decades now, we've been talking about helping a continent that has basically been ignored by the main powers and Europe. It's basically just been taken advantage of and destabilized. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Pretzel.
Frau Präsidentin.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Mogherini would like to solve a global problem. But don't be ridiculous. You can't even resolve the situation in Europe. The CSU came up with a slogan: we will have to give up our welfare, send it to Africa and Asia. €500 million, €1 billion, okay. Up to 62 billion euros if we have private investments sending money to Africa as well. It's the same thing as we had in the Juncker plan. This time it won't work either. It really won't work, because the investment possibilities in Africa are worse than they are in the EU, even if we are coming to a similar level. If we're going to be investing this money there, it won't be enough. The federal government, looking at the intra-German refugees, migrants, they promised 93 billion euros within Germany. So please don't believe that for these millions of people in Africa and Asia, they're going to be happy with 62 billion euros, when just in Germany, the federal government sent 93 billion euros. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Pretzel, Mr. Etheridge has a blue card for you. Do you take it or not? Yes, finally. Mr. Etheridge, you have the floor. 30 seconds.
Yeah, and thank you, sir, for having the courage of your convictions to answer a question. I wish everyone had the same courage. Do you think that the EU public will be joyfully celebrating the calls for global wealth redistribution on a scale that Karl Marx would have had his eyes watering at, that we've heard in this chamber? Or do you think perhaps the taxpayers of the EU might think, perhaps we'd like to keep some of that money for ourselves, have it spent in our own countries? Do you think they share the zeal of some of our colleagues for throwing money elsewhere rather than in their home countries?
Mr. Pretzel.
Colleague, fortunately in your country, you're allowed to decide on your membership of the EU, to say no. And Franz Josef Strauss, I think, would turn in his grave if his colleagues, Mr. Weber, had acted the same way. Sending wealth, well, we understand this as a green communist idea, but it's nothing that a so-called conservative power in Bavaria should be doing. So, all the best with you on the 23rd of June.
Mr. Voigt, 1 minute.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Dear colleagues, if we don't know what to do in Europe, then obviously the idea is to come up with a new plan. And from Mr. Timmermans in October last year, we got this new plan. 160,000 refugees were to be relocated. Only 1,400 have been relocated so far. No one knows the precise figures. And Mr. Timmermans himself talked about what we've achieved in the Aegean Sea, and we should achieve that now in the southern Mediterranean. What have you actually achieved in Aegean? How many of the 72,000 Syrian refugees have been relocated? And And what about the 28 member states? Only 5 of these member states have been actually involved in the relocation of refugees, and only a few hundred have actually been relocated successfully. So I'd like to know, if you look at the cause of all these problems in the US, how many refugees have the US taken? And Ms. Mogherini, a last word. It's true that it's important to save lives at sea, but then those who have been saved should be taken back to where they came from, according to the Australian model. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. ZVER, 1 minute and a half.
Spoštovani, pozdravljam danes predstavljen predlog Evropske komisije o novem migracijskem dogovoru. Do zdaj smo v Evropi le gasili požar z različnimi akcijami, kratkoročnimi.
In Europe, up to now, we've only had very short-term actions, and of course they were very important to try to stem the flow of migrants. However, with the new migration agreement, we're getting closer to a more long-term solution. The 8 billion financial assistance will be used by the neighbouring countries to better manage the flows of refugees, and in particular to afford better protection at the borders and fight against corruption. What's important are areas in the countries of origin where it's possible to place an application. We've got to be development orientated. We need development in the real economy. And is this going to mean that few people try to go to Europe? The development aid is given. We pay much more than American or Chinese taxpayers, but it needs to be more selective, and every member state should be rewarded who complies with international agreements, who are prepared to receive people and who cooperate against illegal migration. Those governments who do not shoulder their responsibilities and do not cooperate, we shouldn't give them any assistance or trade or visa facilitation.
He has a blue card for you. Do you want to take it? Then Mr. ZANYI, 30 seconds.
Thank you for the opportunity, colleagues. Colleague, you mentioned that we need investments in countries that where migrants are coming from. There are 2 questions. Do you think that the Juncker plan could be extended to such a program? Second question, do you see any issues in strengthening bilateral relationship for the external service, like financing these countries better?
Hvala lepa za vprašanje. Dejstvo je, da je ta.
Yes, let me answer your question. Now, the fact is that this idea already exists. This is planned as the Juncker Plan 2 for states outside the EU. Of course, it's true that without any foreign investment, in particular European investment, and Europe contributes more than other countries such as America, there's not going to be economic wealth and growth without that assistance. So I think that in the long run, this kind of fund is the most important idea and the most important measure in the EU's part to avoid illegal migration. Mr. Panzeri.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. The success of the European initiatives depend on a number of details, because both internally and externally we must look at legality, solidarity and respect for human rights. Secondly, we have to have partners that are reliable people, as I'm saying this to Verhofstadt, that who have genuine partnerships. We need cooperation. And finally, we need sufficient financial resources. We must overcome what we still have left in the debate in the Member States and the Council today. There is a lot to think about. And I think we should prefer the system of the Eurobonds. But it's useful that we have a safeguarding clause introduced which will leave that we know how it works. If it does not, then we will have financials that are more suitable to deal with the problem.
Mr. Marias, 1 minute.
It is a given that in the first half of this century we are going to see large movements of population because of wars and other causes. So we need to be able to deal with these migratory flows in the framework of the UN and the EU. So we will have to strike the traffickers and exert pressure to Turkey in order to apply the agreement we have signed, as well as the Valletta agreement. That means that we need to move faster with getting people back to their original countries, as well as creating hotspots around the Mediterranean. On a further time horizon, we need to do something about these people in order to be settled in the EU, like we have done with the refugees. And of course, first of all, we have to do something to counter poverty in their countries, and that means that we need to invest in the Middle East and Africa under the condition that human rights will be respected. Thank you very much.
Griesbeck, 1 minute.
Merci.
Thank you. Many of us agree with the ambition set out in this partnership and cooperation agreement with targeted third countries. We have been waiting for such a partnership for some time, as Guy Verhofstadt pointed out beforehand. So I'd like to take you at your word today when you described your absolute priority at the beginning of the text, which is saving lives in the Mediterranean. This is even more pressing given that 5 or 6 days ago a terrible shipwreck led to the deaths of at least 700 people. You also talked about a step change, a change of paradigm when it comes to practically implementing such new ideas rather than just announcing them. This is why I don't understand, despite all the hard work on the Coast Guard regulation, both the Council and the European Commission refuse to accept that maritime search and rescue operations come under the heading external action. One of the tasks of Frontex should be to build on this strong political determination to actually turn our good words into action by ensuring that we have such a role for our external border coast guards.
With this proposal, it's not about cooperation or about migration. It's about putting an end to refugees. To make sure, with that in mind, we have the economic, financial, and even military means being employed. Can't we see how xenophobic we are and how future-oriented we are, because we're really putting an end to human rights, and we seem to be continuing down that track. We want to institutionalize, we want to close our borders, and we are seeing this in the context of Eritrea and Sudan. This is shameful. The European citizens don't want to see a cynically closed Europe where we can't breathe. We want to see a serious discussion based on how we can organize a more solidary and more open Europe, showing the responsibility to receive refugees. Let's get back to the drafting table.
1 minute. I'm sorry?
Thank you, Madam President.
That our response to the present humanitarian crisis in Europe should be a comprehensive one. And I agree that Africa should receive our increasing political consideration. Nevertheless, the first ideas proposed on the Migration Compact do not mention two extremely important points. First, there is no mention on the defence of human rights. We seem only interested in getting rid of present and future refugees. Of course, we are ready to pay for getting rid of them. The second lacking point is closely related to the first. Apparently, we totally trust all African leaders, morally and economically, My question is, are we going, for instance, to trust the countries which were mentioned here as we have trusted Turkey? Without a defence of human rights, without a strong democratic control on our own procedures and on our agreements with third countries, we are about to repeat all mistakes made in the recent past. Thank you, Vice President. Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Mr. Lavia, you have a blue card for Mr. Terry Cabras or not? No. Madam Atkinson. Madam Atkinson. Mr. Terry Cabras.
Why not?
Okay, so go ahead.
So you talk about human rights, but do you not... Sorry. So you talk about human rights, but do you not agree with me that the human rights industry actively works against us? On a radio programme recently on the BBC, I actually challenged the Red Cross and said, you turn economic migrants into refugees. And he openly admitted that. It's there to hear on tape. And I was in the Greek migrant camps 3 weeks ago, and the same thing's going on. Do you actually believe that taxpayers' money should be wasted on such initiatives?
Mr. Terry Cabras.
I just believe that we shouldn't confuse things. Human rights should be accomplished everywhere. If someone doesn't, well, that's not my fault. I'm sorry. We should do that.
Thank you. Mr. HOOKEM, 1 minute and a half.
Thank you, Madam President. Having been to the camps along the northern coast of the Schengen area, I can tell you it's a bonanza for criminal gangs and terrorists. In Dieppe, I even saw port security letting Albanian people traffickers climb fences into the port. And it was I that was threatened when I asked him to stop this happening. Not one penny of British taxpayers' money should go into this disastrous EU migration policy. And if you want to control migration, if you want to stop deaths in the Mediterranean, then we need to be turning boats back. Britain has a new problem this summer. We have our own invasion of migrants to the south coast. And the EU has tried to hide its plans for a common EU Coast Guard and border force by holding the debate in the first plenary session after the UK referendum. Now I ask myself, why would they want to do that? Is it because they know the British people would recoil at the EU controlling territorial waters without having to even ask permission from the government? I hope people who are undecided about how to vote in the UK referendum listen to what the EU are planning. That immigration policy is decided at EU level and they're asking for 50 billion to fund it. Just yet another reason for the people of Great Britain to vote to leave.
Thank you. Mr. There's a blue card. So, Mr. HOOKEM, there's a blue card for you from Mr. Bogovic. Do you accept it? Go ahead, Mr. Bogovic.
Po 23. juniju je zagotovo pričakovati še naprej vrsto let pritisk migrantskega toka iz Afrike in...
Well, for a number of years we have seen pressure in terms of immigrants from Africa and elsewhere. Now we hope that the UK, after the 23rd of June, will make sure that they will not be one of the states that in fact want to participate in the solution of that. If you don't want to participate, do you think that it'll be solving itself, this problem, without any contribution?
Mr. HOOKEM.
Well, can I correct you? It's the 23rd of June, 25th, and you'll have missed it. I hope that when we leave the European Union will sort this problem. We, as an island nation, will sort our own problem and sort our own borders.
Speaker is Mr. Fontana. 1 minute.
Thank you, President. I'd like to thank the High Representative Mogherini on behalf of my group for the condolence she expressed, and all the colleagues of the Chamber who have been close to us now. But coming back to the subject at hand, I'd like to say that There are two things that need to be pointed out. First of all, it's true there are migrant flows, and it's true also that often these flows are motivated by criminal organizations who tend to earn money. That also includes the terrorist organizations who are responsible for the attacks in our countries, and they're often linked to European criminals. So we have a moral obligation to stop these flows. And then there's an unassailable right, I believe, whereby a person has to be entitled to live and grow in the country they're born. So, of course, assistance for African countries is all well and good, but we must ensure that these African countries apply all the policies to ensure that people may remain in those lands. And let's not do partly what we've done with Turkey, where we engage in alliances with countries who unfortunately do not respect human rights and create huge problems for our policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Synadinos, 1 minute.
We're talking about yet another plan that will have to counter the causes of migration. I'm wondering what happened to the previous plans. Did they succeed or not? The only thing certain is that there's no one responsible. No one can utter the word mea culpa. You have failed miserably. And we can see that in the fences along the Balkan countries, as well as the fact that Article 25 of the Schengen Treaty is now applied. Now we have a new readmission plan with third countries, whereas we're still waiting for the application of the readmission plan with Turkey. You're talking about blue cards for illegal immigrants when we have young scientists that are out of work. We are talking about integrating those people when we know very well that they have totally different mind views. At some point, someone will have to undertake the responsibility for the blood that has been shed in Paris, in Brussels, in Copenhagen, and in the Aegean. Finally, I would like to say something to the colleague from the Communist Party of Greece. Those remarks belong to you, sir.
Madame Gabriel, 1 minute.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. For some time now, several members of this House have been calling for full incorporation of migration as a strand of EU external affairs policy, part of our diplomacy. In conceptual terms, this has now been done, so the challenge facing us now is to turn that into practical action. I would like to stress three things. First of all, the need for in-depth discussion and thought about funding of this. Secondly, examples of good practice in the selected countries, which are priority countries, should be evaluated. Thirdly, ensuring that financial instruments be identified, in particular EDF. We have to reduce the number so as to improve impact. Secondly, Africa is of course a key continent. When it comes to management of migration flows, we have to step up controls at the borders between African countries. We have to manage for inter-African migration management. As far as the sources or causes of migration are concerned, it's essential that we deliver more in terms of development aid. We have to find an approach accompanied by incentives which actually work, to act as leverage to push through reforms accompanied by human rights respect. However, I would say that would strike a note of caution when it comes to the message we send to other countries which aren't described as priority countries. I also have a question. What role do you see for African regional organizations? Finally, as far as implementation of the action plan adopted in Valletta is concerned, what measures have you provided for to evaluate the human social potential of the African diaspora in Europe? And what difference do you draw between sub-Saharan, sub-Mediterranean and European countries? Thank you.
Speaker is Mr. Guerrero, 1 minute.
Thank you. If we adopt the migration package, or by adopting it, the Commission has taken the right approach, I believe, which is based on a holistic strategic vision, taking account of the different aspects of migration, based on agreement and association with the countries of origin and transit. and which is based on a medium and long-term approach. If there are 70 million displaced persons throughout the world as a result of wars, clearly, if we want to be a global player in conflict prevention and solution, that is something that's essential if we're to combat migration. If in the world there's an additional 60 million people who are displaced because of hunger or humanitarian crises, clearly we need investment to put an end to poverty in these countries. I'd like to underline, as the rapporteur of humanitarian aid in the European Parliament, that this whole process needs to be based on the respect of human rights, on international humanitarian law and principles of humanitarian action. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Kölmel.
Thank you very much, President. On behalf of the ESA and the parties say that the measures we're seeing here today are correct in our opinion, but let me also add that however right we think it is, we must provide aid in the centers of crisis, but at the same time we should not forget accompanying measures, and accompanying measures must be found in Europe, in the EU, and the EU has again failed on that point. We still have no uniform procedures with respect to ensure safeguarding our outside borders. We have no general rules as to how we should act. We see various methods of acting because there are countries that say we can accept unlimited numbers of refugees, and others have introduced quotas, and others are simply refusing altogether. And if you look at the safeguarding measures for our outer borders, then without that, we wouldn't get anywhere. How can we provide help in Africa? Because if we want to do that, we must make sure that our own house is properly attended to.
Thank you, Madam President. I very much welcome the fact that the Commission is offering financial incentives to help find a solution to the migration crisis. The agreement with Turkey can't act as an example. Similarly, I don't have much hope that people will listen to Australian suggestions calling for the adoption of an Australian model. In other words, diversion of boats in the open seas, transport of refugees to refugee camps on islands in the open seas, and the paying of money to states with terrible human rights record to accept them. Given the EU's position on migration and the Human Rights Convention, it's not possible here. So when it comes to the role of the Marine, what ships should they use, in what waters, under what sovereignty? How would they stop these inflatable dinghies reaching European islands? I'm looking forward to initiatives coming from EU foreign ministers at the EU level proposing a solution covering all member states. But Austria, like all member states, would be expected to implement the decisions of the European Parliament and the Commission. At least that would help if they started doing that. Thank you.
The European Commission is talking about a pact on migration, and the main ideas are the control of the external borders and the fight against trafficking in cooperation with African and Asian countries along the lines of the recent agreement with Turkey. However, all of those things are just stopgap solutions and do not address the root causes of the problem. These migratory flows are due mainly to the austerity policies and the fact that there are no demographic policies within the EU, and as a result we see that we have a fertility problem in the EU, and on the other hand the fact that in the countries around us we have poverty and wars. So within the EU we need to support child rearing as well as create more jobs for the young, and abroad we need peace in the Middle East and Africa in order for those people to have better living conditions. Unless those things happen, the problem will get worse.
Thank you. Madam Scott Cato, 1 minute.
Chair. While I acknowledge the concerns that some people have about the impacts of migration, the standard of debate on this issue during our referendum campaign in the UK has become highly distasteful. Those who argue we should leave the Union are deliberately confusing three issues. First, control of our borders. Leave campaigners know we still control our borders, which is why Vote Leave wrote to the Home Secretary asking her to refuse permission for Marine Le Pen to enter the UK to help them campaign. Secondly, asylum for those who need it, the central theme of this debate. Here, the UK has rejected our responsibility of acting in solidarity with the countries under most pressure. We should be working with them to protect those fleeing conflicts for which we are more responsible than most as a result of our disastrous policy interventions in the Middle East. Thirdly, free movement. This is a crucial part of the single market on which our economy depends. Leaving it would damage businesses and households and limit opportunities for thousands of British people who live, work and retire across the EU.
Thank you. Madame von Storck. She's not here. Next speaker, Madame. 1 minute.
An African trust fund? You want billions from the UK taxpayers' pockets? For African... The UK is already the second largest contributor of foreign aid. Only last year we contributed £2.5 billion worth of money to Africa, but you want more. That was in foreign aid. Taxpayers actually fund the NGOs who are actively working against the wishes of the UK citizens and the citizens across Europe. I was in Greece with the Libe Committee last week. The message from the Socialist MEPs is we will reopen our borders. Our borders will be open. Even the NGOs were actually shocked at that, saying this would lead to riots in the camps. Unless we set the political messages right, billions won't make any difference as the human rights industry is actively working against us. The only way we can only help genuine asylum seekers is to reject your proposals, reject the EU and vote Brexit on the 23rd of June.
Madam Atkinson, there is a blue card for you from Mr. Zdekowski. Do you take it? Then Mr. Zdekowski.
Vážená paní Atkinson, souhlasíte s nás...
Madam Atkinson, do you agree with the view of some of those who are in favour of staying in the EU, who suggest that those who want Brexit don't know the facts and speak nonsense? You have said that in Libe we are for opening the borders of the EU. When did you go to the Libe meeting last time? When did you hear that we discussed those things, in fact?
Well, Madam Atkinson.
I haven't got it on. Oh, I have. Right, OK. Libe, I was in the Libe meeting a couple of weeks ago where I represented my group ahead of a discussion post going to the Conference of Presidents, where I specifically asked for something that should not go onto the agenda, which was the EU-Turkey deal. So I was there representing my group. We were actually ignored by the Libe Committee. Timothy Kirkhope, a British MEP, refused to have our group's proposal put forward. And when I was in the migrant camps 3 weeks ago, the socialist Peter Niedermüller actually said, we have open borders here. We are working with the Commission to open our borders. Now, there were 3 groups in here that were represented in that meeting that said, you cannot give that message. It is dangerous. And the NGOs told me that. So you should ask your socialist colleagues what they're saying about we have open borders. That is sending the wrong message to Africa and the rest of the millions that want to come as migrants to our countries that we cannot afford.
Thank you. Mr. Korwin-Mikke, 1 minute.
Thank you. The problem is not about the immigrants flooding us, but the wrong kind of immigrants flooding us. They do not want to work in Bayerische Motorwerke. They were promised very high benefits, and they just want to receive the benefits.
I once had to pay 3,000 euros for calling them what I called them, but I said that the African one diplomat said that the African shit was pouring over Europe. Our duty is to teach those people reason, and only Hungary can do that. We should stop paying them benefits. We should force them to work. And you best learn by example. You should you should teach by example, and you should stop paying out the benefits to ourselves as well. In socialism, you heroically fight the difficulties that are unknown in any other political systems, and I just hear that all around us, everyone is trying to do that.
That you should respect us without using inappropriate words in a debate in the parliament. It's just a matter of respect, I would say so. You want to say something? Okay, Mr. Mikke, there is a blue card for you. Do you accept it? Do you accept a blue card? Yes, go ahead, Anna.
Mr. KORWIN-MIKKE, I just want to know what facts you are using when you are talking like you did just 1 minute ago. Are there any facts? Do you know how much other parts of the world has got in values from exploiting the African continent during hundreds and hundreds of years? I want facts.
Okay. Mr. Mikke.
I don't really understand what the link between exploiting Africa. Well, America was also exploited, and it's developing splendidly. I was just referring to a diplomat from Congo, so to an opinion of someone who knows a lot about immigration from Africa. I just know that when you pay people for doing nothing, you demoralize them. People have to work and not just live on the benefits.
Next speaker is Mr. Engel, 1 minute and a half.
Thank you, Madam President. It's not always a pleasure to notice to what degrees of surrealism debates in this House can turn. I had in principle the intention of starting with the statement that, judging by the number of references to the poor British taxpayers that have been made by right-wing British members of this House, who so far have not refused any single European subsidy for themselves, out of pure humanitarian concerns, we should wish for them to vote leave on the 23rd of June, because after that maybe the British taxpayers will be reassured. More to the point, Madam President, or Mr. President right now, I would want to say the following. I would want to believe, High Representative and Vice President, what you have expounded to us, but I doubt that it's going to be enough. I doubt it's going to be anywhere near enough. Maybe for a migration compact of some sort with a number of select African countries, that could work. But for the development of Africa, for turning African fortunes around, or for orienting African dynamism and growth into a different direction, I doubt it. The 500 million alone that we're supposed to take from the European Development Fund reserve is much less than the Chinese are going to be investing in a single railway line from Mombasa to Central Africa in the coming years, and that shows the discrepancy between our intentions and what we are ready and willing to put on the table when the worst comes to the worst, or when action is called for in order to replace words. And I would really wish us to be able to finally contribute to an African renaissance. But with those means, I'm afraid it's not going to be good enough.
Thank you. Ms. De Monte has the floor for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Recent tragedies of migrants which have happened off the Libyan coast and of Crete remind us that we're still in an emergency phase. After the closure of the Balkan route, asylum seekers can only go via the Mediterranean to reach Europe. The proposals presented today seek to use a new approach to tackle the migratory crisis based on new cooperation between the EU and countries of origin and transit for the migratory flows. Economic investments in these countries through infrastructure projects and resources coming not only from the EU budget is certainly a good starting point to improve European actions here. For a long time, Italy has been asking for these kinds of policies. Migratory flows to Europe are certainly not going to stop in the short run. If today's actions are to succeed, everyone will have to contribute, and it's important to remember that this is a European issue, not one that affects just a few member states.
Thank you. Mr. Zille for 1 minute.
Mr. Vice President, Madam High Commissioner, the European Commission is returning to well-tested methods as it has used in the previous migration crisis from Morocco to Spain, from Libya to Italy more than 10 years ago, respectively, to pay for the migrants to stay outside of EU borders. Madam Mogherini mentioned that the narrative has changed, that the migration crisis is no longer an EU issue but a global one. That is correct, and it's also correct that instead of aid to North Africa we bring investment. But the EU narrative on migration has also changed from the one what we heard recently, that all migrants should have a place in the EU, that they all will be working for the benefit of EU economy, and even drag the EU youngsters plagued by unemployment into the labor market, to the new one where we try to distribute all asylum seekers among member states, setting member states against one another. However, the most important risk remains. The criminal organizations will not abandon this lucrative and safe migrant business. They're probably going into the camps and projects in North Africa and the Middle East.
Thank you. Mr. Paet for 1 minute has the floor.
Loomulikult on süsteemne lähenemine migratsiooni.
Naturally, the systematic approach to migration crisis is important. Therefore, such attempt is any welcome. It is clear that neither the European Union nor the world at large has not done sufficiently for the refugees to find safe shelter near their home country. For example, Syrian refugees in Lebanon and Jordan need places for the children at school and health services in order to wait for the end of the war and return to home. Many of the war refugees don't want to come to Europe, but they have been forced to do so. European Union must afford much more help to the refugees as close to their home country as possible through the UN Refugees Office. Only this will alleviate the pressure on the Mediterranean. If we cannot create such conditions for the refugees, so no agreements of Turkey or others will help. Desperate people will find a new and more dangerous route. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Silikiotis has the floor for 1 minute. Dear colleagues, at the moment when we're talking about a new migration pact, the situation is getting worse by the minute. Daily, people, including many children and babies, are dying. Only during the last week of May, 900 people died in the Mediterranean. The situation is a shame, and it is unacceptable. It's not possible that the official policy of the EU is to close down borders, to sign these readmission agreements with Turkey. The situation is tragic. Even the people that are rescued at sea then have to face tragic living conditions and the hotspots that are turning into concentration camps. In order for this crime to stop, we need to stop these empty promises. We need to move forward immediately with a common asylum system. We need to create legal, safe routes as well as a permanent system for relocation of refugees. We also have to have decent human living conditions in the places where these people stay. Thank you. Mr. Annemans has the floor for 1 minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, the people who seem to hold power in this unholy European Parliament have been talking about a European Migration Compact. This is clearly a Europe-wide approach to migration. I can tell the citizens of Europe that this approach is anything but a compact. The door is being thrown wide open for what you describe as legal forms of migration, to a further extension of the blackmail based on the dirty deal with Erdogan, new taxes because of these migration bonds, all of this underpinned by your constant theme, more money and more taxpayers' money for migration. The citizens of Europe have been warned. The failure of Schengen, the failure of the EU's open door and open border policy should not allow us to be distracted from the fact that we need less rather than more EU policy when it comes to migration.
Thank you. Mr. Radev has the floor for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. The unprecedented migration crisis of the past few years has clearly shown that no member state can tackle it on its own. There is therefore a need both for a coordinated common European response and for close cooperation with third countries. That said, I think that the EU has to act along the following three lines to alleviate the migratory pressure on the EU. First, we need to distinguish between economic migrants and refugees. Those seeking a better life can benefit from legal channels for entering the EU. However, no member state has a legal framework in place that entitles them to illegally enter our territory by attempting to illegally cross our land borders. They should not expect from the EU to grant them the same support it grants to war refugees. Second, the EU should step up the return of both irregular migrants and of persons who are not entitled to stay to their respective countries of origin. For the European Border and Coast Guard to be effective, the EU has to soon sign readmission agreements with the countries of origin affected. Third, I think we should revisit the idea of setting up hotspots outside the EU. To my mind, that will reduce the migration pressure on the EU, since only those who are entitled to international protection will be able to enter the EU once they have been granted asylum in accordance with EU law. Tackling the migration crisis will take new measures and a new approach on the part of the EU. Strengthening international cooperation is an important element of EU action to that end.
Thank you.
Thank you, President. I welcome this communication. It was understandable that priority was accorded to negotiations with Turkey, but other more vulnerable countries also need our attention, something which is acknowledged today. But when member states have contributed just 80 million to the 1.8 billion Trust Fund for Africa, this European Parliament must insist that genuine new money is provided, development aid in particular is not diverted, otherwise more for more risks becoming more for less. It is one reason why the Italian proposal for Eurobonds as part of the compact should be considered. These bonds would not just be financial bonds, they would be bonds of solidarity between Europe and the wider world. Following the UN conference on financing for development, the pledges made for climate finance at COP21 and Europe's own support for a financial transactions tax, we have to be open to creating new, innovative forms of international finance to meet new international challenges. I admit that the idea of a grand bargain with third countries to halt refugee flows is distasteful to many. You don't bargain over people's lives. But let's face it, the EU has done precisely that, linking visa and trade concessions to readmission agreements over many years. So if the money is genuinely additional, if we recognise that 86% of refugees are in the global south, not making their way to Europe, if this new money first and foremost improves the lives and livelihoods of those refugees and of all peoples in the countries to which they have fled, if Europe honours its promise of safe routes for legal migration, we should give it our support. Finally, this communication on first reading does appear to fall into the trap that Europe in its external policy is much more effective as a funder than as a political actor. I praise the commitments towards global diplomacy on migration in the communication, but would have liked to see more emphasis on the EU's diplomatic role in conflict resolution, as well as on active efforts to ensure human rights and international humanitarian law are upheld, not just saying it, but doing it. Nevertheless, I know that is the personal commitment of the High Representative Vice President, and on this and other issues, she and Vice President Timmermans have our support.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Mr. KORWIN-MIKKE has asked the floor. Yes, you have it. On the procedure, yes.
President, I don't want to answer a member who has made the sort of contribution, and I don't have to give him permission.
Excuse me, Mr. Howard. No, it's not a blue card. It's on the procedure. Please, Mr. KORWIN-MIKKE, you have the floor.
In my speech, there was used a word, in English word, shit. It was not in my. It was not my word. In Polish, it was szambo, which is in English, it is cesspool or something like this. And the original German was Abschaum, which is in English scum, not shit. So please, I am not responsible for the translation.
Okay, I see. Okay. It wasn't pleasant anyway, what you said. We're moving on. Mr. Sulik, for 1 minute.
Thank you. We have far too weak policies in Europe to protect people. We're paying other countries so we can keep the refugees away from our door. It's not just hypocritical, but it's dangerous because we're making these people dependent. The closing of the Macedonian border was shown that we have reduced our efforts and not this doubtful agreement with Turkey. We see that borders being closed, and then we see Austria is closing its border with Italy at the Brenner Pass. And it doesn't matter what kind of sanctions can be used or what kind of indebtedness agreements can be reached with Africa at all. Let's help people who need help, but let's help them there. The majority of people in European countries are against mass immigration, and politicians don't understand this, and they don't protect us. People will become voters in favor of extremism, not because they want to be extremists, but because the politicians have sadly let them down.
There's a blue card from Mr. Costa. Do you accept it, Mr. Sulik? Yes, you have the floor, Ms. Costa.
Thank you, President. When you said that Italy should close its borders, I'd like to ask whether you mean that they should actually be pushing back people who come by sea, pushing them back to countries where they will suffer from war and persecution. Often these people are women, children, other vulnerable people. What do you mean by closing the borders of Italy? Pushing these people back?
Mr. Sulik, you have 30 seconds.
Well, you shouldn't throw them back into the sea or shoot them, but simply make sure they are returned to the places where they have come from. And there, Europe must set up sort of central camps, such as we see in Libya and in Turkey. And we have, I meant Lebanon, not Libya, but we shouldn't just distribute them throughout Europe and then sort of send them back like a package. That's not how things work.
No. Mr. Telitska for 1 minute.
Chair, Vice Presidents, the deal with Turkey basically broke up the business models of the smugglers between Greece and Turkey. And of course, what we see a reorganization on a route which is much more risky, and it's a deadly one. And in this respect, I must say that your package is an essential one. We can discuss the details, we might have nuances, some disagreements, but it is the right approach. I don't see anything problematic in linking, basically, development aid, cooperation, investment with control of migration flows. And I see no problem linking it with the roots of the problems which, of course, exist. I leave aside, obviously, that we've got human rights problems in Turkey and elsewhere, and we will have to tackle it. So what I would like to say is that this is the right approach, but this will not work out well or sufficiently well if we don't have a strict, vigorous, serious return policy. And this is something that we need to work on. If we're going to have that, and we will have a balance, I'm sure that we will finally create a unity in the European Union, unity that we need for a European solution, and I think that that moment, the polarization that we have on some other issues of that issue will go away. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bizzotto for 1 minute has the floor.
Thank you, President. We're sick and tired of hearing the same empty promises from the Commission. For years we've been talking about illegal immigration to Italy and elsewhere. This is why we've been called opportunists, xenophobic, and so on, racists. You in the Commission, all you've done is talk, 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 and you've done nothing. Even worse, you've simply hidden your head in the sand. You've declared that immigrants are innocent and have to be helped. You seem to be taking the mick out of these poor people who are suffering from mass immigration. So the way in which Renzi's been dealing with migration has been a joke. The same could apply to the Juncker plan. The tragic truth affecting the people of Europe and Italy is that every day millions of illegal immigrants are invading Italy. We're sick and tired of these liars. This invasion of immigrants has to be stopped immediately. The only solution is to close down our borders and defend them.
For 1.5 minutes, Mr. Brok has the floor.
President, Madam Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, when I listen to what some people are saying, I have to say that those people who don't want to receive refugees, they're the ones who want to prevent any measures to make sure that no refugees actually come here. This is the hypocrisy that you, Mr. Sulik, actually represent. This hypocrisy. And I think an agreement with Turkey means putting an end to the smugglers. And secondly, it means that refugees in Turkey can actually be helped because of the 6 billion being made available, and it's starting to work. You cannot... well, why are people getting so annoyed with these countries? So you're not even involved, so stop saying those things. Now we've got these proposals, and now we're trying to work in Africa. That's so much more complicated because there's a long-term development problem there. Helping people there means that finally we have to provide development aid. We have to make sure there are proper dignified conditions in the refugee camps to make sure that people can stay close to their homes. And we're also trying to break the business model of the smugglers off the African coast. These are all sensible plans. Now, you're suggesting that if people are at sea, we have to rescue them, taken them here. I don't really think that's Christian responsibility. Look what's happening in Greece. Is that reasonable and humane? So please stop coming out with your proposals.
Thank you. Mr. Brok, of course you caused a wave of blue cards. I'm only going to allow one to the first one that asked for it. Mr. Christea, do you accept it? Mr. Sulik and Telitska were asked for a blue card later, and they have already spoken, so I will give the floor to Mr. Christea. Mr. Christea, you have the floor for 30 seconds.
Stimată colegă, ați făcut referire în intervenția dumneavoastră la acele state care nu vor să primească migranți. Aș dori să vă întreb cum comentați.
I would like to ask you, what do you think about the intrinsic position of the President of Romania, Mr. Iohannis?
First of all, I didn't talk about individual countries, but I talked about some colleagues who are against refugees and at the same time against the measures which would stop these refugees from coming. Secondly, I consider that if we're able to get fewer refugees, then it will be easy to talk about relocation. Thirdly, I would like Mr. Sulik to answer my question, because I think we should recognize that it's only if we tackle the causes in the country to put an end to war and development problems and to try to help there. That's the proper approach, rather than letting people take to the sea and drown. That's the terrible consequences, or putting up barbed wire in the Brenner, or dividing Macedonia. So Greece and Italy are large, important European countries. I don't want to turn them into refugee camps where we have borders coming.
Thank you, Mr. Brok. Mr. Papadakis has the floor for 1 minute. Thank you, sir. The success of this new migration part for relocation does not lie with new measures. It lies with applying it and applying it correctly. If we do not do that, we are going to have another failure like the failure we had with the relocation program. So we need to stick to what we have agreed. We need to respect human rights, we need to give more emphasis to legal pathways, and we need to cooperate with the third countries, and we need to have adequate funding. Those are the main elements that have to be applied in the new pact. We need to have a common policy, as well as a common management of our external borders, and we need to stop illegal activities. However, border management does not mean closed borders. Thank you. For a minute and a half, Mr. Lavia has the floor.
Grazie, signor Presidente.
Thank you, President. And to the Vice President of the Commission, the proposal that we are looking at today is going in the fair direction. We must start a sensible investment policy aimed at the countries where the refugees stem from, so that they can see there is development, and that means that we will be slowly curbing the process. We know there are many Africans. We see the growth in African populations, so from now on, in 20 years' time, we're going to see huge inflows, but we do have a length of time where we can do something, and we must have stable relations with these people. Maybe 500,000 is not enough, but certainly it's a beginning, but we need to do more. Timmermans talked about the positive and negative aspects, mixed investments, and we must know what we're doing in those countries, because there are countries in Europe that are not actually participating in this process and clearly don't want to add their bit to the process, because there are countries that are closer to the borders, therefore feel they need to do more. But we must all make a common effort. So we also have negative incentives because it's part of the process, but we want to make sure that there is a genuine success in this European process.
Thank you, Mr. Lavia. You have a blue card from Mr. Frunzulică. Do you accept it? Yes, Mr. Frunzulică, you have the floor for 30 seconds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleague, because of the economic situation, because of the social situation, because of the civil wars taking place nowadays in some countries in Africa, Europe is going to see more and more people trying to come in Europe in the next years, especially from Africa. Don't you think so that at the end the European Union has to come with a long-term strategy and policy to meet this important challenge? Because it's not only practical measures or effective solutions to take place now, to be implemented. We need a long-term strategy for this. Thank you.
Please stay within the allotted time. I mean, a blue card is not a speech. Mr. Lavia, you have the floor for 30 seconds.
Thank you for this question, dear colleague. The strategy we're talking about is something that allows investments in African countries. It's not going to we're going to see a return on it in a short time, but we will see a package of billions over a few years, and maybe we need to add more, because we must make sure the strategy is efficient. But it's a long-term strategy, because in the shorter term we must look at other instruments to close the gaps.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez has the floor for 1 minute.
Well, dear Vice President and colleagues, the choice is very clear. Either Europe remains an old continent on the defensive, or Europe sets a partnership for the future with the neighbour countries to support their development, to better manage migration and also to support refugees. The choice is so clear. Of course, this means a big undertaking based on investment, but let me underline, investment is also jobs. And many new jobs can be created for both young people in Europe and in the neighbour countries. And I believe that you should use this argument of jobs, new jobs which can come with this initiative, to convince Member States to put more resources on the initiative. Because we do need more contribution from the Member States. And let me tell you that so far, young people understand this very well in Europe. They share this vision. They have many initiatives in this direction. And this is my pleasure to announce that very soon, young people organisations will come with concrete proposals exactly in this direction.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. You have a blue card from Mr. Telitska. Although, Mr. Telitska, you spoke 10 minutes ago, so I think I'm not going to give you a blue card because we're already over time and you spoke 10 minutes ago. Thank you for your understanding. And now Mr. Rangel has the floor for a minute and a half.
Thank you, President. First of all, the most important point, in my view, in this Commission initiative is the question of structural factors. There are two fronts. First of all, the immediate needs, and I think we have to focus all available resources into this to save lives being lost in the Mediterranean. This is an obligation which the European Union as member states can't disregard. At the same time, we also have to focus on structural needs over and beyond cases such as Jordan and Libya. Obviously, the question of Africa is essential. As a Portuguese citizen, I'm familiar with the situation in Africa. And I do believe there will be a flow of people coming from Africa. This is likely to be a source of concern to us for some time to come. It's not just a temporary crisis. So it's of fundamental importance that we can intervene, in particular in sub-Saharan Africa. So I think the Commission proposal goes in the right direction. The different countries in the European Union must follow that lead. We have to open our borders to refugees, it's true, but at the same time we have to manage the crisis. And to do that, I think we should support the Commission proposal. So I think you've given us some excellent news, and I'd like to thank you, Vice President, for the efforts made. It's difficult to defend such a proposal.
Thank you.
Hvala, predsedujoči. Toda zdaj sklepamo partnerstva z afriškimi državami.
We're now entering into partnerships with African states, and that is in fact better because we haven't seen poverty in Africa just since yesterday, and therefore I'm not against this proposal at all, but I'm just wondering whether it's too late. Maybe not showing enough solidarity and the member states don't trust it anymore. The Africans are perhaps not receiving what they have been promised. So I can say that immigration is not just a European problem, but I'm wondering about this approach, because will it have the consequences that we're talking about? The idea of this agreement. And there are member states that don't want to contribute. We need investments. But the burden shouldn't just be shifted onto the African continent and close European borders. And we can't either allow European money to get into the wrong hands. We must be very strict about who receives money, and we must make sure that we have honest and straightforward partners in the African states. And we must strengthen the legal immigration routes. The Balkan route has now been closed. We are seeing less people killed in the Mediterranean, but there will still be new roads of immigration being opened. But I would say that immigrants in Greece now can apply for asylum via Skype. And I agree that the way we handle immigration takes a strategic approach, but we shouldn't just curb the flows of immigration, but we must make sure that we have an honest cooperation with Africa, also economically, and we must have better human.
Mr. Voigt asked for a blue card. However, Mr. Voigt, you have already spoken, so I'm afraid that like Mr. Telitska, you too will not get the floor. I realize that there's a lot of interest on this discussion. However, we're already running late. Mr. Kirkos has the floor for 1 minute. We see that there is a population explosion in Africa, and that combined with poverty and wars means that we have to face the following question. Could massive, I'm talking about millions of Africans coming to Europe, be part of the solution? The European Commission is trying to give a double answer. It says no, but we are proposing this new framework for cooperation with a lot of incentives for the countries in Africa and our neighborhood. If you convince us that with this plan you are going to do something about the fact that money is wasted and we have a mechanism for transparency, then I think that your proposal will be valuable and useful. Otherwise, we will have a mechanism that will simply transfer money to the people in power in African countries, whereas Europe will be paying them to take their citizens back. Thank you. Now, the list of speakers now says that Ms. Schlein has the floor for 1 minute.
Presidente. Thank you, President. I agree with the importance of an investment plan for Africa, which will bring benefits to a cooperation programme. Nevertheless, this proposal does seem to be focused on strengthening cooperation and capacity of third countries and prevent people fleeing from wars and poverty from getting to our coasts. In the document, there's a conditionality which betrays the idea of cooperation and the whole relationship with countries, third countries, seems to be based on this, whereas it should be based on equity. And I think it's worrying that the money going to border management, that's not going to create jobs for African youth or fight imbalance, but will simply exacerbate them and doesn't tackle the deep causes of migration. So member states have to move from words to action because so far the promises haven't been fulfilled. Outsourcing responsibility for our borders is not the answer, particularly because European governments are refusing to go for common solutions. That's the only thing that can help us. Thank you.
Thank you. That was the end of the list of speakers, and we're moving on to the Gets the Eye procedure. We've had 17 requests for the floor. You realize that we could not have 17 speakers. We're going to listen to 5 speakers, one from each political group. And Mr. Kelly has the floor first.
I have listened to this debate from the outset. Naturally, it's a very controversial topic, and as a result, the debate was somewhat controversial too. But at the same time, I think credit must be given to the Commission for, number one, coming to terms with this very, very difficult and challenging issue, and also giving leadership, when leadership actually is minimal in many instances. Their idea of a new partnership agreement with Africa makes sense, using trade and development policies as leverage, and of course ensuring that aid goes to those who need it most. Also, bringing order to a sea of case, having legal rather than illegal immigrants. All that's necessary. People mightn't like it, but I think it's necessary. And particularly also that emphasis that this is a global problem. And like COP21, Europe cannot solve this on its own. It can give leadership, and hopefully, like COP21, we can get a global agreement that will deal with this in the long term and hopefully end the migratory flows, especially for those who have to flee.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Το λόγο έχει για 1 λεπτό η κυρία Μίτση.
Thank you. Ms. Mitzi has the floor for 1 minute.
Thank you, Sir President.
Thank you. I've been 3 years in this Parliament talking about migration and the problems that it causes. I always emphasized on giving them a future in their own country. Thanks to this, we will be decreasing the problems of these people, saving them from death in the Mediterranean, and avoiding problems that can cause uncontrolled immigration for European countries. I followed with satisfaction the commissioners talking and focusing on aid programs for African countries in their own countries. Thanks to investment with the private sector and financial aid as well. We should be careful that the billions in aid and investment will be translated into benefits for the citizens. Otherwise, the problem will not be solved. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tsabatsky has the floor for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Representatives of the Commission. The proposals of the European Commission as to the crisis with illegal migrants could be described as a flop. It was a flop when you said that all illegal migrants could be invited and welcome on our continent because they've said that they're refugees. Most of them are not, they're illegals. It was a flop when you said that we can have quotas and allocations. It could be a temporary allocation, permanent one, because what happened? Nothing happened. Nobody was allocated. Then you had a flop with the dictator Erdogan. You are making an agreement with a dictator, a person who breaks human rights every day and on a daily basis suppresses liberal democracy. It was a flop also, your promise to pay billions as ransom to this person, Erdogan. I have another proposal to the colleagues who keep saying that we can welcome all the migrants. Well, take a migrant family at home and show us how it's done. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Desarnez has the floor for 1 minute. Ms. Desarnez, you have the floor for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. That was a very interesting debate, but I must say that I would like to have heard more. I think we need a very clear vision moving forward, and that isn't something we got today. However, clearly we do need to act. We need to act in 2 different ways. First of all, we need a veritable development policy. It's not enough for us just to spend all day long saying who gives most money to Africa. We have to redesign a development policy so as to ensure that it's efficient and effective, and that's not the case now. Secondly, we have to create legal channels for economic migration. That's the only way to fight against illegal migration. We have to grant multiple entry visas so as to ensure that legitimate migrants can come and work in Europe for a few months and then go back home when they have work there. We have to fight against all employers in the farming and building sector who legally employ illegal immigrants. At the same time, we have to ensure that we have effective measures. Only by working on those 2 pillars can the European Union seriously hope to find effective answers addressing this problem. Thank you.
Mr. Juaristi has the floor for 1 minute.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Mrs. Mogherini and Timmermans, now you're showing goodwill, of course, but the discourse is a bit late. Mr. Peter was very elegant, but I don't think it's just short-sightedness on the part of member states. Now they know that for a long time that refugees are dying on the way from Africa, and you know that sustainable development for Africa is fair and right for Africa. Now you know that, or they've known that for a long time. Well, unfortunately, they've done a bit too much. So I'd like to ask you what guarantees does the European Commission have? How are you going to get the member states to change their foreign economic trade policies vis-à-vis Africa? That's what it's about. Without these changes, there won't be a plan or strategy or anything. Thank you.
Thank you. We're finished with the Catch the Eye procedure. So, for the European Commission, Vice President Ms. Mogherini has the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Sometimes listening to some of the comments, let me be very frank, we had doubts that maybe a careful reading of the proposal itself could be useful, to start from the facts. In the debate this afternoon, you mixed many different things. And Verhofstadt was asking in the beginning, a pity he's not here, if this is a duplication of the deal with Turkey. The two situations are completely different. As Frans was mentioning in the beginning, from Turkey we have mainly Syrian refugees. It's temporary, hopefully temporary, we're working also on that, this is another story. Flow of refugees, asylum seekers, that falls into one specific international legal framework. And we are trying to deal with that in a sort of immediate, and also, let me use this word that I don't like at all, but that's the reality of our policies today, emergency mode. Here, what we're putting on the table is something completely different. It's something that starts from the fact that with Africa we have a common interest in working on the development of the continent with a sense of partnership. And some of you asked, how are the African interlocutors reacting to this? Very well, very well. Yesterday, I was in New York in the Security Council. African countries, but not only African countries, Latin American countries, were saying, well, this is the right way to go, because finally, you don't only invest in development, which is the right thing to do, by the way, in itself, and by the way, I'm proud to say that the European Union is the first donor worldwide. First, and if you want, I can give you the figures, also being the first donor to Africa, first donor internationally with more than half of the official development assistance worldwide, 68 billion euros in 2015, over 20 billion ODA to Africa every year. And this is going to stay. I'm proud of that. This is the right thing to do anyway. But there is another issue. Please go to Ethiopia and talk to the women that came back voluntarily, not from Europe, from the Gulf, because they were becoming slaves, where we support projects from the ILO to reintegrate them in their communities, offering training and job opportunities. And listen to their stories, and then come back to me and say that we are doing deals on their shoulders. No, we are protecting their lives and their rights. Go and talk with the young girls from Nigeria that turn into sex slaves in Europe and tell me that the deal we want to strike with Nigeria is not to protect their rights and their lives. I'm sorry, but you don't protect the life of people only saving them at sea. You also save their lives at the beginning of the journey. Because go to Lampedusa and listen to the stories that the survivors tell you. Or if you cannot fly there, look at the movie Fuoco a Mare. There was a presentation of it done a couple of months ago in the European Parliament in Brussels. Hear to those words that tell you that these people are turned into slaves from the very beginning of their journeys. They're in chains, crossing the deserts, locked in jails in Libya, locked in the boats that then sink. We do have a human responsibility, and our African partners as well have a human responsibility to protect their lives. This is what we're talking about. And doing this together with international agencies, starting from the IOM and the UNHCR. So what we're talking about is job creation, perfectly right, for the African women, for the African youth. Go to Agadez, that was living out of tourism before security turned it impossible. Offering that youth job opportunities that are not linked to the smuggling networks or the criminal organizations. working on education, working on social development, working also on human rights and protection of the people. This is what we're talking about. So, is it enough? No. But, sorry, if we never start to do the right thing, in 10 years' time, the people coming after us will be facing exactly the same thing. And I wish the people that were here 10 years ago to have done the same choices that we're proposing to you today, because maybe today we would have better situations in Africa and also in Europe. We have to start somewhere. So, we know very well this proposal is not going to turn the situation upside down in 24 hours, but there is no policy that would do it. No policy that would do it. And we should stop selling illusions to our people. But there are good things we can start doing consistently in partnership to change things, and we have to start. So this is what we are proposing today. This goes together with opening regular channels for migration, for sure. This is also, it's not my direct responsibility. This is also linked to the need for member states to be coherent and do their part. This is also about other actors in the world to do their part and be coherent, from Asia to Latin America to North America to the international organizations, to the UN system, and to our African partners. Because the only thing that would change Africa is not only our compacts, is African leadership. And here, believe me, we are very straightforward. Very much. Because there is no other way of changing African societies rather than, yes, investing, but also creating, together with investments, the conditions for investments to flourish, which are rule of law, interconnection within the continent. If you want to fly or to travel from one African capital to the other, you have to fly to Europe. Does it make sense? Developing infrastructures, developing security conditions that are good for European investments, but are good for African investors as well, and people. So yes, it can be a win-win-win. And last but not least, some of you mentioned the fact that as the flows diminish or go down to zero on the eastern route, we see an increase on the central Mediterranean route. Let me tell you, please have a look at the numbers, but most of all at the nationalities. It's two completely different routes and there is no link. As of today, last year, through Libya to Sicily, we were facing a major inflow of Syrians. It's not the case today. At the moment, we are not seeing a shift. It's simply that Africa is young, is poor, is facing a dramatic effect of climate change, and this is only natural that this happens if we do not work with a long-term strategic perspective to change this. That's what we're suggesting to you to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Also for the European Commission, Vice President Mr. Timmermans has the floor.
Just a few remarks in addition to what High Representative Mogherini said. It is my deep conviction that the only way we can maintain a humane refugee policy based on our most fundamental values is if we make a clear distinction between people who deserve international protection and people who come to Europe because they see economic opportunity in Europe. All too often, and we've heard it again here today, people pretend that everyone arriving on Europe's shores is an economic migrant. I've heard some of your members saying it today. This is a cheap way of getting rid of your moral and legal responsibility vis-à-vis people who deserve international protection. But it is made possible because until now we were not good enough in making a clear distinction between people who deserve international protection and people who do not. Why? Because for too many years Greece and Italy were left alone with the problem and they asked time and time and time again for a European solution, and the only answer they got from the rest of Europe was, not our problem, your problem, take care of it. So now we need to solve it, and the only sustainable way of solving it is doing it in a European way. And we can only solve it, and we can only get pan-European support for a humane refugee policy if we sort out the issue of economic migration in a sustainable way. And the compacts with African countries is one element to do that, and that is why I passionately believe in this way forward. I've heard no one who criticises it giving us a better idea. If you have a better idea, share it with us. But to simply say, let everyone in Europe, is the shortest way to ending our humanitarian policy, the shortest way of ending the reception of refugees in Europe, and the shortest way of giving populists the opportunity to say that everyone who comes here is an opportunist looking for a better future at our expense. Tell that to a family fleeing from Raqqa, fleeing from Aleppo, for barrel bombs. Tell them that they're economic migrants. It's a scandal. So that's why we believe, as a part of a comprehensive long-term migration and refugee policy, we also need to be able to show that we can return people to their places of origin if they don't have the right to international protection. And more importantly, that we create opportunity in African countries so that economic growth does not disappear in the pockets of the elite, but goes to everyone with talent, and every young person has an opportunity to build a life for themselves in their country of origin. That's what we need to do. And surely this is not going to do this on its own. We need the member states to contribute. And the biggest problem here is not just the lack of finance. It's the lack of clear direction, of coordinated efforts, of doing the same thing from all 28 with the European Union and its institutions, to all do it in the same vein, instead of having individual, very often post-colonial ideas of how to have our relationship with individual African countries. Let's bring some order into this. And finally, Mr. President, let's never forget that we're talking about human beings. We're not talking about numbers or objects. We're talking about people who have dreams like you and me, who want a better life for their children, who don't want to be abandoned by the rich parts of the world. And I had a very wonderful experience last week in Sweden, a country that has taken in per capita more refugees than any other European country, more than 160,000. Now that they have the impression that we're slowly getting this under control, you see the mood in the Swedish society shifting towards, okay, let's make a success of this. Companies offering thousands of intern places for refugees, schools accommodating many new pupils, communities welcoming new citizens. And I hope next week we will see at the European Championships Zlatan Ibrahimovic being one of the stars, the son of people who fled the Balkan Wars 20 years ago, and who's now a very proud Swede, and Sweden is very proud of him. Let's see how many Zlatans we will have 20 years down the road in Sweden. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Timmermans, and Ms. Mogherini as well. Now, this discussion is concluded. Let me make an announcement. According to Article 105.6, the chair of the Conference of Committee Chairs has informed me that no objections have been raised within the Conference of Committee Chairs to the recommendation by the Econ Committee not to oppose a delegated act. If no objections are raised by a political group or at least 40 members within 24 hours, the recommendation shall be deemed to have been approved. Otherwise, the recommendation will be put to the vote. The recommendation is available on the plenary website. The next point of the agenda is a common discussion with a declaration by the Commission on certain measures concerning legal migration, as well as an action plan for the integration of third country nationals. On behalf of the Commission, we have the Commissioner in charge, Mr. Avramopoulos. Commissioner, you have the floor.
I don't hide that you inspire me to speak in Greek tonight, but since it will be all Greek to everybody, I come back to our working language. Honourable members of the Parliament, dear President, I am really pleased to present before you today a revised EU Blue Card proposal and an EU action plan on integration. I know from the very beginning that this House values the importance of having sound and forward-looking legal migration policies, which are the other important side of the coin of managing migration comprehensively and in an effective way. But legal migration goes beyond migration and mobility as such. It plays an important role in strengthening the EU's competitiveness, and it can address demographic challenges and labour shortages. While on the one hand we will need to continue investing in the skills of our existing workforce and addressing unemployment, the rapid ageing of the population in the European Union will require us to attract skills from abroad to address shortages in specific sectors. I will give you two examples. In the ICT sector, we need more than 100,000 highly skilled professionals per year. In the health sector, there will be around 1 million unfilled highly skilled vacancies by 2020. Even if we upskill our labour force, this takes time, and besides that, we will still need more people to fill the shortages. Let me also state another fact, which I know is difficult to hear in the current context. European societies are and will continue to become increasingly diverse. Today, there are 20 million non-EU nationals residing in the European Union, around 4% of its total population. The key element here is not to fight this reality, but to embrace it and turn it into an advantage by ensuring the successful integration of migrants, including, of course, refugees, into the host societies as soon as possible, and therefore maximising the benefits of immigration. Today's proposals address all these issues. On the blue card, the European Union is increasingly competing with a growing number of other destinations for the same global pool of talents. We want to become more attractive than countries such as Australia, Canada and the United States of America. Therefore, the EU needs to establish a more efficient, transparent and simpler scheme for attracting highly skilled workers. This will bring substantial benefits to the European Union in terms of innovation, transfer of technology and increased investment flows. This will enhance the European Union competitiveness and help creating new jobs. In fact, the new blue card scheme would bring an